Good day to you. This is Anagalactic bringing you another science presentation in cosmic geometry. Now we have our lab cat with us. I just want you to see our little lab cat. There she is. She will be famous someday. You get a little glimpse of my apartment there. Now what we have today is a couple of things. We're making enormous progress here at Anagalactic after really a long delay in publication. I finally was able, she's going to her perch, and now we may officially begin. What I want to show you today are just a few things. First of all, we have a PDF document that I downloaded. You can also download it for free. It's called Atomism, and it's by a man named Whyte who wrote this in 1961. We also have this, an expansion of the analysis section. This is a Wikipedia page, and you can see it's called Biocentrism. Now, you might have heard that philosophical science, which is a legitimate, I don't mean that pejoratively, it's biocentrism. But Wikipedia says this needs to be disambiguated, the reason being that it's a term from ethics, where it is an ethical point of view that extends inherent value to all living things. Now, I'm rather certain after having read Robert Lanza's book, Biocentric Universe, that he would not disagree with that at all, although that is not actually what he's writing about. And the Biocentric Universe is a book by Robert Lanza, who is a very prominent doctor. He's a physician who has done some amazing cutting-edge work in I would call it physiology. I'm not very well acquainted with that side of science, but he certainly is. But as many scientists do, who I'll just say it's a well-known phenomenon, that they, even though they're not physicists, they feel compelled to give a opinion, really. It's a philosophical point of view, but he takes it very seriously, and so do his followers. In fact, the book that I just read was given to me by a friend of mine who just figured I would love to read this, and I just finished it. I actually read it in one sitting and made quite a few notes. Pardon me, I just learned how to tie a double Windsor knot, but I don't think this is the right shirt. A double Windsor knot is quite large, as you can see, and it's a fabulous knot. This shirt doesn't seem to support it as well as I would have liked. I'm sorry about that. So what we're going to be talking about today is atomism. That's what I am most interested in. And the reason, there's our Wikipedia page on atomism, the reason we're covering this is that Roger Anderton, who is the man who says, I don't know how he does it, atomicism, I think is how he says it. And you just got to suppress your laughter. If you're listening to me, don't laugh at me. Of course, you can in the privacy of your own home. And Roger Anderton, it doesn't affect his presentation. I just noticed that he has the same situation that I do, but with two different words. But it doesn't really matter too much. It's like the difference between saying spheric or spherical. I say 99% of the time that adjective is used, it is with the adverbial ending spherical. There's a whole set of rules on when you add the AL and when you don't. In the case of spheric and spherical, it's just a toss-up. It doesn't really matter. But I do attempt to make a distinction because I am an English major, I guess you'd say. Now, this matter of atomism is extremely important in context in what I'm attempting to present, which is a fundamentally axiomatic reapproach to geometry and physics. And in fact, this involves mathematics as well, all of which I would have to say it would be quite surprising to anyone who knows anything about my lack of background. I don't have any degrees. So why would I assume that I've got a better approach? Basically for the same reason that Robert Lanza believes he has something worthwhile to say about biocentrism, which I finally said right. Okay, that was very good. So I'm going to click on this link for this book, which is an entire Wikipedia entry. I mean, look at this. Going back here, the title of this article is Robert Lanza, who is quite a famous fellow in medical science. Again, I'm not sure of the terminology. Let's see, what is he called? He is a medical doctor and scientist. Okay. He is an American. He's in his 60s. He's just 2 years younger than I am. And he's done stem cell research, clinical trials for blindness, science policy activism. He wrote to George W. Bush. And then he has an article that came out in 2007, A New Theory of the Universe. Well, wow. Biocentrism is a new theory of the universe, according to Robert Lanza, who has an enormous devoted following. This man is absolutely beloved. The man who gave me this book to read, which I read yesterday in one sitting, it's a good read, I would have to say. It's not my cup of tea. I'm too busy doing other things, but of course, my friend who handed me this book, after bringing it up in several of our we talked for hours over coffee. He's a very well-educated, well-traveled man who actually right now is on his way to India. He left on Sunday, that was 2 days ago, and he's now leaving, crossing the Pacific to go to India for 2 months. So this is the kind of guy that I talk with who handed me this book, and I read it. I promised him I would read it. He really wanted me to read it. So we're going to talk about that. But you may ask why, when actually what I want to talk about is this, atomism. It's to show two extreme ends of a spectrum. And that's where we'll begin today. Atomism. Now, just to show you how we're going to approach this topic, I will turn this off, and this is the PDF document, which I'll show you. You can get this for free by just, essentially typing in the name of the book. Now, I'm going over to my PDF reader just to show you something. At the beginning of the file, this is a downloadable book, which has been, you can see, photocopied, if I'm using the right word. And I believe this may have the link right here. But it'll be well, there it is. Yeah, there's the link right there. It's at archive.org. You'll see it at the bottom there. It's very easy to get. It's free. And it's a very, very, very good book. Extremely good book. Now, the man who wrote this is no longer with us. He wrote it in 1961. And here's some of the things that Lancelot Law Whyte wrote about. The unconscious before Freud, well, that's not quite the same thing as atomism, is it? And then accent on form, the unitary principle in physics and biology, which is I didn't notice that until now. Every man looks forward. He has a critique of physics, and then something about Archimedes or the future of physics. So, but this is very important. Edited by Mr. Whyte. On R.J. Bošković, Ruđer Josip Bošković. We will return to that in a moment. But I thought you might want to see that. Now I'm going to continue now to show you where there's the title page. Wesleyan University, a few good quotes. There's always a bunch of stuff to lead in. But here's the table of contents, which is not very long. And I covered that in my prior video yesterday. So we're picking up there. And you've already seen everything that I wanted you to see. It's a very good book to read, and you can read it for free. I strongly recommend it if you're interested in that sort of thing. But I took out what you'll see here in a LibreOffice document, which I will now scroll through so you can see there's more. It goes all the way to number 16, number 17, number 18. 18, we end with a complete description of atomism. He's defining atomism for us. And the man who turned me on to this was indeed our hero, Roger Anderton, who is still going strong. That man is continuing to produce top flight material on a rather wide range of subjects, but constrained to physics, obviously. And he's not what I would call a philosopher, which definitely Lanza is. And that both of these ends of the spectrum are very important today in cutting-edge science, because since we've reached an impasse in quantum mechanics and indeed in cosmology, although that's not as commonly admitted, physics is really in a very unstable state right now, because of course we're looking for solutions to the quantum paradox and solutions to our investigations of deep space in order to understand our environment completely. But you could say that going out to the edge, to look toward the edge of the universe, is one direction, whereas going in to find the atom, whether defined by Democritus or by anyone since, Bohr or later, of course that leads to the quantum paradox. What I've discovered, I just throw this into the mix, is the relationship between those two paradoxes, which to the best of my knowledge has never been noticed. And it's a geometric relationship. Well, you can sense that because it is a geometric framework of the edge and the center. Now, the edge would be one thing, but the center would be many things, because there is no center to the universe that can be found using our current approach. It looks as though the universe is uniform in all directions, and therefore it is either somewhat of an illusion to say that the Earth is the center of the universe. I think we all agree that's probably not true. But actually, you can't tell. What you would have to do to convince yourself, and we do this automatically, of course the Earth cannot be the center of the universe. Well, it wasn't that many centuries ago that a lot of, I'll just say, devoted to a certain orientation, did think that the Earth was the center of the universe. Well, we know that it's not in the sense that they thought it was. But because of relativity, it's not entirely out of the question to suggest that perhaps the Earth is the center of the universe. But if you were going to say that, and you're a rational scientist who, values his credibility, you would certainly want to add something to that rather challenging statement, because what about Venus? Isn't Venus also the center of the universe? Yes. And so is the sun. And so is everything in the universe. Anything that's a thing would be the center. But you see, that also, you would have to say more, wouldn't you? Well, it leads to the quantum paradox, because nobody can find the center of anything. The electron has no center. But the real question today is, does the proton have a center? The photon obviously does not. Now, each one of the statements I'm making now has a string of footnotes attached, where men are exploring whether perhaps the photon does have a center. And it's very difficult to say. And in the case of the electron, I'm sure there's a school of thought that at least proposes to assume that the electron also has a center. We're going to be talking about that in extraordinary detail All right, I did want you to see all of our support material so we can go through this in an organized fashion. But I have a certain I have a certain strategy here to contrast atomism with biocentrism, Robert Lanza's theory of the universe. He actually puts it that way. He's not kidding. And I don't mean to suggest that that's something that might be lampooned. It's just that it's brand new and nobody's ever really formalized such an approach, which is what essentially he says that physics is finished. But you see, that's purely negative. That's not really what he's saying. It's just he's implying that physics cannot get the answers that humans want. I agree with him. Physics cannot get all the answers that humans want. Where it gets interesting is trying to figure out what he means when he says that biology will give humans the answers that they want. And that is a remarkable theory, which is, caught the fancy of millions of people, including a very prominent name in, I'll just say, this part of science, a man named Deepak Chopra, an Indian gentleman. I'm not fully acquainted with him, but I'll tell you something. I believe I found out that our hero, at least my hero, Roger Anderton of England, the man who really has a couple of videos on this book by Whyte on atomism, he is familiar with Deepak Chopra. And I've seen Deepak Chopra's name come up in so many contexts in what I research, but I can't ignore that. I'm going to find out more. And my original introduction has already occurred because Whyte, that is Lancelot Whyte, got a tremendous accolade. Well, not Whyte, I'm sorry, Lanza, Robert Lanza, received quite a high compliment from Deepak Chopra for his biocentrism. So all of this is somewhat related, but here at Anagalactic, we're really on a certain course toward getting basically the quantum. And that would include the quantum of gravity, or quantum gravity as that is called if it can be discovered. It is being sought. And of course the quantum entanglement paradox and the collapse of the wave function, which both Dirac and Penrose say is the key to everything. I totally agree. All right, so to get going here after only 20 minutes, you see that this is actually an interesting path to get toward the quantum. We're backing up a step to check the history of atomism, which leads toward relativity. And Roger Anderton is an expert in general relativity. I won't even begin to cite the tremendous work that man has done. And I don't just mean labor. I mean, this man has insight that science really needs. And I try to be on the same team. So I have reached out to Roger Anderton just to see if he would be interested in knowing about the geometry that I discovered. Now I have to remember that I'm unknown. But he did notice my comment, and he's going to consider it. I don't know, but I hope he considers it. And shortly I'll be reaching out to Alexander Unziker with the same simple proposal. But here you see where it gets a little tough for me. I'm really jumping the gun a little bit. And the reason I say that is my paper is not done. Without a paper, you have dog dirt. I could make all the videos I want. I believe that's a valid form of communication, but I also recognize, I actually agree that the only way to produce science, if you think you've found something, you must write a paper. You must write a paper. That's the beginning of consensual science. It's not sending notes through the office and hope that, You have to write a formal presentation. One of the reasons for that is, I mean, besides the obvious, you're putting out your idea in an organized, readable fashion. But you see, later, if it's taken seriously to any degree, you will have to defend yourself. It's the defense of your thesis. It's just perfectly normal this is going to happen. It's not like you're being challenged, like, you're ugly or something like that. No. And so what can happen is you might, people tend to defend their ideas, which is good, but you have to stay logical. But if you feel cornered, you may say something about your presented thesis that's not exactly what you said originally, but it'll be in the paper. And so it really holds the research scientist to mind his P's and Q's. Be sure that you know what you're talking about. Well, by putting your ideas down on paper, in your paper, you can be held to account. That's extremely important if there's a high-level theoretical controversy involved. Why, a lot of egos get involved. It's not all bad. I'm not putting that in a bad way. All right. So what I'd like to show you now is the status of my documentation. Now, what you're looking at here, I'll just highlight. I don't think this is centered. Let me bring this down. Oh, no, you can see it all. That really is the whole thing. And that is merely to show that I do have a public address. What you're seeing is at this address, https://adagalactic.github.io/Sterling. And I believe that requires the capital S. I think it is case sensitive in this case because it's going through the GitHub system. This is a remarkable boon for me. And it's public, but it's not, it's an extremely powerful system for someone producing this kind of a paper because it's integrated with Visual Studio. And you do synchronization from your own computer through GitHub to your final web page. So I'll have the link for this in my description for this video. But I also have put both links into my prior video yesterday. I've added that to the description. So you can check that. And here's something else you can check. Another location of my publication, and this is called, now, press release. I should take this out because it's not a press release, but I was testing. This is the Google Docs system. Google Docs is a remarkable system that I just came upon in my research for how I can publish. Now, I cannot publish through Vihra or Archive, not because they wouldn't like to see my paper come to them, but there has to be some filter, because if you just open yourself up to the public, you'll be inundated. And so the way that they restrict submittals is you can send a paper to Archive, which is the preferred open source publisher of scientific papers. In other words, it's not a journal controlled by a university or some organization like that, which is extremely restrictive. They really only do business with people they do business with. And if you know where that quote is from, you know that's meant to be threatening. That's a threat. Don't try to interfere with our astrophysics journal or our particle physics. No, that's for us and to propagandize the public. That's seriously the case. But with an open source, which is somewhat extending the generally accepted meaning of open source, relative to a journal, Archive is the place to go. Grisha Perelman, a Russian Jewish physicist, published his $1 million prize-winning paper in Archive. This is the truth, and you can check. Perelman, Perelman. He was given the Clay Prize, the Millennial Prize, for solving one of a handful of valuable enough unsolved problems in mathematics to be worth $1 million US. And he won it from his paper that was published in Archive. So that was my original target. But they only accept submittals from a .edu source. In other words, you have to be registered at an educational institution and have your own address that the edu site has approved. I could seek to acquire one at our local university. It's a very small university campus here, but I haven't found it necessary to do so because I discovered Google Docs and then GitHub, both of which allow publication where anybody can link to it, but there's no overhead. It's just on the responsibility, on the recognizance of the publishing research scientist, which I am attempting to establish myself as having something worth saying. So that's where you'll see further information. I'm just going to scroll down here to show you there. All this is, I mean, you can see this is nothing, but it shows that I can do it. It shows me that this can be done. So that's just very recently that was finalized. So those of you who are looking forward to my paper, and I would assume if Roger Anderton were interested in my work, he too will want to see my paper. Now, there's a physicist over at the university, also a Russian Jew physicist, who is interested in my work. I spoke with him, and of course, he asked me. I wasn't prepared for this because all I was doing was I wanted just to talk with him. But he was more interested than I expected he might be. And he said, "Can I see your paper?" And then, so he's waiting for that. He's been waiting months, although I'm sure he's forgotten about me by now. Well, pretty soon I'll recontact him. Also, a radio station. I contacted a radio station about a year ago and was able to get connected with an interviewer who is likewise sufficiently interested in what I said to agree to interview me. And he said, "Can I read your paper?" So that's where that's at. That's very important that I have that. All right. Now, what we would like to do is just, that's a half an hour in this presentation. So if you need a break, take a break. But I can't take a break because I much prefer to have continuity. Now, these are the 6 chapters. The chapter that I want to point out, and I should have a pointer, and actually I can do that, but I have some technical difficulties with it as yet. So this is the chapter we want, analysis. And that's where I extracted what you will see on this page, in this I just turn off there. Oops. Yeah. In this document, this is where we would like to begin with a study of atomism. Now you'll see that atomism, and I should have the context for this, the numbered items over here, I keep pointing over, well, this time I pointed the right way. Right now I'm looking at the document, but you can see but I can never remember to turn the right way. So that is correct. The duality of space, what are these bulleted items? These are the aspects of atomism that have undergone historical change, or in any event, are the aspects of atomicity that need to be stated in order to define what it is. there is a fundamental ancient concept of a hard point. That is the atom. It's essentially the atom of Democritus. And what it means is the ultimate constituency of all things, beyond which there is nothing smaller, is an atom. It's called an atom. And in the days of the Greeks, they considered that to be so small that you can't see it. Well, they were right. But that is rather obvious. In other words, they knew that when you grind something into finer and finer powder, each of the little pieces in the powder are still finite, but they still could be crushed. If you could expand the grain of sand, for instance, with a microscope, which they certainly didn't have, you could grind it up and make, 1,000 particles where there was only one. So an atom is not anything greater than the smallest possible hard object. That's very important because, as you know, at the center of what we call the atom, which is part of the paradox, it is not hard. It's a wave. And that produces a paradox. Because how is the wave forming a center? Really, we're talking, when we say the atom, there's a geometric aspect as well as a physical aspect. So you have to define the atom physically, and the ancients, really up until very recently, thought that it had to be something solid, inside of which there is nothing. It's smaller. That the smallest piece of material is itself material. Well, we know that that's not quite true now. But you still have to deal with that issue. Well, if it's not hard, what is it? That's the quantum paradox. So that's the importance of exploring the history of the theory of the atom, which underwent a major change in the 20th century, as I'm sure you're aware. But can you define exactly what that change is? Well, I'll be frank with you, nobody can yet. Although I am certain that I can, making me the first man to actually get the solution, to be able to define what an atom is, and therefore to define what is atomicity. Well, we know now it's not the atom, as we call the atom, because Bohr, really following up on Rutherford and Thomson and several other physicists of the early 20th century, Bohr essentially got the geometry of the atom so as to explain, I'll just say, to a new threshold, what is the relationship between the proton and the electron. And both of those are considered to be fundamental particles, but that also has a history which has changed. Now, what would otherwise be the atom, now that we have gotten far enough in, really with microscopy, but the advance of technology has enabled us to see further, down into the constituency of things. So that we have discovered what we call the atom, but it's really ambiguous what is meant by an atom now, because the atom that we discovered is not the Democritus atom. In a sense it is, though, but it's in a chemical sense, that the atom is the smallest, I'll just say, reasonable unit at scale, because the periodic table itself and all of chemistry is based on the electron-proton atom. But what makes that interesting in context of knowing what an atom is, that atom that has electrons in the shells, those electrons are all ranged around a center that has a different particle that's not an electron. So the atom has an electronic surface, but it has a protonic center. And we now know, as you know, has been proved, that the proton is indeed a particle. So that's the atom. The story doesn't end there, though. Because in order to fully, to satisfy what we actually want to know in science, in order to be sure that we know that the atom is the proton, or you could say the proton is the true atom, or the true atom is the proton. You see, atom is being used in two ways now. Well, almost everything is being used in two ways now because of the wave-particle duality. So now we're focusing in on the proton, which has a known radius, although it's actually a range, because nobody can be absolutely precise about the radius of a proton for reasons we'll go into, but I'll bet that you can immediately intuit that there would be a problem in getting an exact radius of a proton, because where is the surface? It's considered to have a charged surface, but that's actually quite naive. It makes perfect sense in electrical engineering, but in actual subatomic physics, we're not so much dealing with electrical force through a wire. We're dealing with electrical force at its source, which is quite an interesting proposition. Now, James Clerk Maxwell made enormous headway with his now universally famous Maxwell field equations. Well, that was one of the first uses of the concept of a field. And the reason Maxwell was able to adapt this concept so well to his equations, that is, what he discovered, is that the field is not a particle. So the proton has a field, but the proton is thereby left ambiguous in its definition. Is it the surface that makes it the proton? And if so, then what's inside the surface? That's what we've been trying to find out with the cyclotron colliders. They're now called hadron colliders. Hadron is just an obfuscatory term that's used by the cyclotron physicists because they think that they're God. They think they're gods. And so they renamed the cyclotron after their pet mathematical concept of a hadron. So they think that they're justified in calling particles by new names because they're such gods. Well, I will pull the pants off of all of them collectively, and Ed Witt, I think it's Ed Witt in particular. They just made it up. And the reason they made up this particle soup is because they have to justify the expenditure of hundreds of billions of dollars. Hundreds of billions of dollars. And the government demands something back from that investment. Well, they made up something to give back to the government. And they seem to be very happy with their... See, they're looking for a weapon, but they don't want to tell the public that. So they make up all these things. The other two terms that you probably have heard of are baryon. You've heard of baryonic mass. Well, that's just a made-up, really nonsensical mathematical term. Hadron has no real meaning. Baryon has no real meaning. And fermion, there is some validity to what they've discovered through crashing two extraordinarily energetic protons together to see what flies out. Well, I can tell you what flies out because I discovered exactly what is happening when those two protons collide. Well, it's exactly correct to a threshold they simply would poo-poo. No, those things are real, they say. Those things that fly through the bubble chamber and can be tracked and then disappear, by the way, that those are particles. Well, of course, they're full of shit. No, they're not particles. This has nothing to do with atomicity. What they're doing has to do with weaponry. And if you don't like that or you don't agree, it really doesn't matter. Pardon the pun. What we're looking toward here is what actual, real scientists want, rational men, such as myself. And we always exist, but now we're overshadowed by government-funded, inbred, absolutely, basically narcissistic. It's a club of white men. They're all white Europeans, including America as being a European country, which of course it is. But they're all white and rich because they're paid by the government to do that. So there's our little advertisement. Now what we're looking for is the actual, what is it we're looking for? What do you think I'm going to say? What is it that's science? That is true men who've grown up and are not, coddled by the government with mansions to say whatever the fuck the government tells them to say. Well, that's hadrons, baryons, fermions. Here's how you shoot a hole in the whole thing so you know that it's full of shit. Their premise is that everything in the universe is a particle. Well, they know that that's been disproved, but they say it anyway to make it seem like they're gods, that they exist in a realm that everyone else is too stupid. Well, the only stupidity in this case would be to look at the particle physics team and check out what they say is true. The only stupidity of a scientist would be to credit them in any way. They're full of absolute horseshit. And the first thing they say is that everything is a particle. Well, I don't think you need to go far to find out that's ridiculous. But it gets worse. And this is what you need to know. Their model is incomplete. It doesn't make any difference whether they found what they call the Higgs boson or not. It will never matter to anyone but them. But of course, a lot of propaganda went around that. In fact, my brother was totally sucked into that. It's like he became a Nazi overnight. Unbelievable how these propagandists are so powerful on the media, because of course the government controls the media. But it's not the Higgs boson that's the linchpin. It's the graviton. Because if everything in the universe is a particle, and they're the ones who say it, they admit we have not yet discovered the graviton. Well, they never will discover the graviton. But if it were possible to discover the graviton, that would actually be quantum gravity, right? Because you found the particle for gravity. That's what quantum gravity means. Although that's not how it's presented. I'm just telling you what's actually going on. We're looking for the center of the proton because the proton makes a position in space. No other particle does. There are 4 particles. There are 3 particles. But the proton has a different state called the neutronic state. But it's still a proton. It's just a proton without a charge. That's actually profound. But we'll get there. What we're talking about now is the nature of the atom. And just to go through these bulleted items and then close this off at 50 minutes. The duality of space. What is meant by... You would have to have read the chapter to know what was meant by that. But it does say, and I'll just read this, there are 2 kinds of space, one of which is empty, that would be void, and the other which is occupied. So can space be occupied by the atom? That would imply that where the atom is, it's taken the place of the space. And everything around it is space unoccupied. So all of this is deeply philosophical, but requires absolutely precise measurements, which we cannot get yet. There's a way through that enigma. We have enough data to get what we want, but nobody has yet realized what it is we're looking for. We cannot find the center of the proton. That will never be done. But then you have to ask why not. And when you discover why you can't penetrate the proton, The reason that you will be able to say, finally, that you understand why we cannot penetrate the proton, which is the ancient atom, the material object which occupies space so that space is no longer empty. Well, what is it that takes the place of the void that we call an atom, which is now called a proton, and that is the correct definition of the atom? What's inside? See, geometrically, we know there has to be something inside. This is a version of Zeno's paradox, which I've solved, and I've given so many lecture series on that I'm not going to attempt to go through it here, because the solution to that enigma actually leads to the solution of the quantum paradox and the discovery of the quantum of gravity. Nobody knows that yet, except I do. So, a bulleted item number 2, the discreteness of matter. There could be ultimate indivisible units of matter with unchanging properties. So this is talking about its unchangeability. Is the proton unchangeable? We're not going to attempt to answer that, but these are the questions that need to be answered very clearly without any ambiguity. So far, that's been impossible. With my geometric system, it is now possible. This is fully mathematically based, which is critical because we're taking measurements. And you have to have a number system for measurements. All right. Bulleted item number 3, the hierarchical structure. These units are grouped into systems of various orders. Yes, they are. In fact, the subatomic particle physicists of the Hadron Collider breed are very concerned about what they think are subparticles of the proton, which you may have heard there are 3 quarks that make a proton. Those are not particles, and they're not even subparticles. They've never been isolated, and it's been admitted even by the collider people. They will never be isolated because they're not particles. They're mathematical entities to explain something else. And they don't want to go that way because they've already committed to the part. They've already shot themselves in both feet. So bulleted item number 4. What are the observable quantitative properties of this so-called, does it have momentum? Does it have position? Okay. Number 5, forces. This is critical. In particular, force pair interaction. Now, the man who wrote this, Whyte, in 1961, was well acquainted with Bošković's work, which is extremely rare. Most physicists are forbidden from knowing about Roger Bošković's work because it would confuse them, possibly. Well, we'll go on. I'll be covering all of this in great detail in our series, which begins now, actually yesterday. We'll be accompanying Roger Anderton as he explains a lot of this material to us. And I'll be carrying on where Roger currently is unable to go, because I'm the only man that I've encountered who knows the right geometry, which means the right mathematical system. All right, so that's number 5. Number 6, equivalence. In an ideal theory, all primary particles are equivalent. That has been proved. The proton is a proton. There are not types of proton. There are not sizes of proton. There are no subtypes of proton. There is, of course, always a footnote. What about the neutron? I'll come back to that. Number 7, point centers, also a critical one of these items. The primary particles are point centers of interaction. What does that mean? That refers to force fields. So, which is paradoxical. Oh yeah, this goes quite deep. Now let's go on. And we'll finish this before an hour, certainly. Now, relational, only the changing spatial relations of particles. Now, relation, that refers to structure. This is interparticulate structure. Again, having to do with force fields, as Bošković teaches us. But these items are bulleted because they actually are separate there are different ways of approaching how to qualitatively and quantitatively define an atom, which in this case is the proton. Number 9, stability. Stable composite systems from force balance. He's referring to Bošković again. Whenever you hear the term force balance, that's non-Newtonian. Newton didn't know anything about force balance. That came one generation later, after Newton and Leibniz. Bošković discovered the dynamics of particle interaction. And physicists are too myopic to know how profound that is. I know what it is, though, and that's what I'm attempting to get out into science. 10, chemical. I don't think we need to discuss that. Electrical, we'll come back to that. Electron theory, that is either a particle or not. That's part of the quantum paradox. And then the electron-proton relationship. Then quanta. Then the nucleus. And then wave particles. And that's not quite the last item, though. Then statistical, which extends the wave-particle formalism having to do with probability. That's the cutting edge now. That's what Einstein hates. So do I. Science is not probabilistic. And then a complete description. Can we sum it all up? That is critical. I insist on that, but that is also insisted upon here by Whyte. And that completes our presentation for today. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. I listen to all of my videos, not only to edit them before release, but I will listen again after I've released it and sit as if I were hearing it for the first time. I swear to you that dozens of times from listening to my own lectures, I've learned something. Because I try to get out a lot of synthetic insight as fast as I can, which is why I maintain continuity, so I don't lose that thread. Because that's a big part of what's missing from scientific discussions. There's been a loss of perspective on the structure of things. The geometry, which is related to the mathematical system of proof. Proof of what? Of geometric relationships. So that's my specialty. This is Anagalactic, bringing you the secrets of the universe, my byline. Now publishing, at long last. I'm quite happy with the progress. It took quite a while, but it's worth the wait, I hope. And keep looking up. That's where you're going to get the real answers in the sense of direct, transcendental knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Just look up at the planets, the moon, the stars. Get a telescope if you need to. Strictly speaking, you won't need it to have direct contact with your source of whatever it is you're looking for. Now, that's up to you. Nobody can interfere with what you need and want. But we're all human, and we all share in that. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you very much, my about a dozen listeners who I believe are following me. I do have 145 approximately subscribers, but that really doesn't mean anything. What you look for, I've noticed, what I look for is a consistent viewership. Like if it's 7, 7, 6, 8, then I have approximately 7 people who are following. That could be wrong, but that's how I evaluate. Thank you again. This is a pleasure to be able to give these video presentations. I learn a lot. I have a lot of fun.